In Afghanistan, people know all that glitters is not gold.
Do you think the outside world realizes the quality of stones that are in Afghanistan?
Masoud Soltani proudly shows off sapphires, rubies, but more than anything, he says, Afghanistan is home to a rich treasure trove of emeralds.
These stones are sold in high prices at international markets. But unfortunately here in Afghanistan, they are sold for very low prices.
Legally, gems and semi-precious stones are sold here, along Kabul's Chicken Street. A small mountain of blue stone called lapis rests in the bowels of a shop. It's waiting to be polished, then will wait even longer for a buyer to come along. There's not much business in a war zone. So Soltani says much mining is illegal, and most gems are smuggled out of Afghanistan with the government fully aware of the problem.
If the Afghan government would invest in the gemstone industry, I'm sure they would benefit, something like $300 or $400 million over the course of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. It may be an overstatement. So, to back up his point, Soltani offered to take us to the heart of the emerald mines in the mountains of the Panjshir Valley. If this nation is going to be able to lift itself out of generations of poverty, it has to find a way to generate income. And one way is by all the natural resources that remain untapped because of the decades of insecurity here in this rugged landscape. It's just absolutely awe-inspiring as we make our way up. It would take us hours to walk, but we're not walking. We have horses to take us up to the top of the mountain. We pass dozens of mines, and the young and old pouring through rubble for a hidden gem. The mines are simply holes punched in the mountain by the Mujahideen fighters over the years. The Taliban has never made it into this region, but warlords have, controlling illegal mining and smuggling.
I can tell you the government only has control of about 2 or 3% of the mines here. That is it. 95% of them operate illegally.
After several hours, we reach the base camp of Soltani's mine, which he says is legal, passed down through his family over generations. And inside, it's about what you'd expect. It operates about as safely as anything in Afghanistan. A few holes are drilled. In go the explosives. Then you literally run for it.
So we're going to be in here when it blows up?
Yeah.
This is exactly why the government makes it nearly impossible to legally export emeralds. They are fragile, much more fragile than a diamond, and are easily destroyed.
This is the challenge we face in the Panjshir, extracting emeralds. We use explosives to reach the gems, and that ends up damaging the stones, lowering the quality.
The Afghan government wants to halt this type of mining until there is peace in the country. It wants to preserve the limited amount of emeralds and other gems until modern, proper mining equipment can be used here.
So it's been about 10 minutes since the explosion, and the acrid smell from the blast is still wafting through the mine. The good news is, in this hole, there's some positive signs that there could be emeralds or other precious stones. So the first job is to get all this rubble out of the mine.
He brought us here because he wants to show off the region's potential.
My real target is that any person, any business association, or any country that is passionate and will help us reach international markets. If we modernize the method and used improved machinery, the emerald extraction process would increase 90%.
And he's convinced on this day we will find gems and orders one more blast. This time we decide to wait outside the mine. At nearly 4,000 meters, it's the first really warm day of the season, which is melting the snow. Suddenly, triggered by the powerful blast, an unmistakable sound. We only captured the end, but the locals say we're lucky to be alive.
Okay, this was took an awful turn for the worse. We just went through an avalanche. If you can look, hand, pants torn up. Snow just came barreling down. This used to be a walkway. I went down that hill Back up now. But shaken.
You guys are okay?
I could have gone all day without that. But it shows the dangers and what people have to go through to work up here.
Guys, they saying it's not safe to stay in here. Let's go in.
No, we're going home.
We limp down the mountain.
Andrew, after you.
But mining goes on the way it always has, with no chance of ending the cycle of danger and yielding only slim rewards. Patience may be a virtue, but it's an absolute necessity in Afghanistan. Just ask Syed Mirza Hussein, a simple bicycle repairman from Bamiyan. He'll wrestle much of the afternoon with this wheel to make about $5 US. He's always called this central Afghanistan enclave home.
The area you see now was a marketplace before the Bamiyan downtown was built. This is where we used to do our shopping.
Much of the outside world knows Bamiyan because of an assault on its cultural heritage. The city rests along the old Silk Road, where in the months before the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the Taliban horrified much of the world by destroying 2 giant Buddhas carved into the mountainside.
I always feel sad, disappointed, and uneasy when I drive past this area.
Sad and uneasy for good reason. The soft-spoken Hussein will forever be known as the man who was forced to blow up the Buddhas. It left a hole in the mountain and an empty spot in Hussein's soul.
This is the spectacular view from Buddha Mountain. And if we walk down this path, through here was the cave to the very top of the Buddha. The door is now locked for security reasons. But back in 2001, Syed Mirza was faced with a horrific decision, marched up here at gunpoint by the Taliban to plant explosives on the Buddha. If he didn't do it, the only other option was being tossed off the edge to a certain death.
There's a bustling market in the city now, but at the heart of the Taliban's power, it was chiefly a ghost town. Ethnic Hazaras like Hussein were imprisoned.
The first day I was captured, I was beaten so badly I couldn't believe I lived. I lost consciousness for 24 hours.
Calling the Buddha's idol worship, the Taliban wanted to send a message of hate to the world. The insurgents lowered Hussein and another man from the top to drill holes and plant dynamite in the statues. While dangling there, Hussein says his friend died of a heart attack.
I took the man the Taliban killed and carried him up here on my shoulder and put him in this cave.
But Hussein lived to witness this.
We felt devastated and upset. It was a world-class, unique statue, but we destroyed it with our own hands. People came from all over the world to see it, but we destroyed it with our own hands.
What's left of the Buddhas are stored in shacks, but much of it has already been carted off by smugglers. Many in Bamiyan, including archaeologist Anar Gol Ahmadi, would like to see the statues rebuilt from the rubble.
Looking at this, it's like the world's most complex jigsaw puzzle. Is there any way this can be rebuilt?
My concern is that they're stored in a place where people step on them and they deteriorate, and when we want to work on the Buddhas to rebuild, they will be in just awful condition.
She knows it will be next to impossible to rebuild the iconic statues. But Ahmadi sees another threat. The Taliban are involved in Afghan peace negotiations. While she dearly wants an end to the violence, she is terrified at the prospect of the Taliban having any government authority.
I think it will be really difficult for women. They don't allow women to work with the tourists on these historical sites. I fear women will once again be underprivileged.
The mountains are now a protected UNESCO site, recognizing the historical Buddhist sanctuary where east meets west along the Silk Road. Within the caves that dot the mountain, brightly painted icons still peek through the years of abuse and disrepair. But these days, few outside Afghanistan see what's left of these relics. It's just too dangerous to get here. Through no fault of his own, Hussein says he will carry the remorse of what he did to his grave.
I always think about what a horrible thing I did back then. I wish I would have been killed, but it didn't happen. Now this feeling of guilt kills me all the time. But what could I do? They would have killed me if I didn't do it.
A decision no one should have to face. As a woman who owns and operates a restaurant in Afghanistan, Laila Haidar will never be confused with a wilting flower. Headstrong, uncompromising, and demanding. She's trying to allow color to flourish in a drab and dangerous nation. Years ago, with $200 and a wealth of determination, Haidar opened a restaurant. It's a rarity in Afghanistan, a place where men and women can mingle together, drink tea, and relax.
It was surprising for people to see a woman establishing a restaurant, but I had to do it. I needed a source of income to start my projects.
This is her main project, just a short drive from her restaurant.
Who will take care of you? Are you a user? Do you want to stop?
Haidar wades into a world where men are addicted to heroin, in a nation where the drug is cheap and easily found. She has emerged as a powerful and unlikely human rights hero to get them off drugs and into treatment.
How difficult was it at first for a woman to approach the drug users? Did they reject you?
I think addiction is kind of a treatable sickness, and you need to fight against it, and that is right. An addict won't get clean with a single shower, but eventually he can be cleaned and saved.
At the rehab center she founded, doctors and counselors can help men such as Hussein Dad.
To be honest, I was tired of addiction, and no friends or relatives to ask for help.
They bear the scars of the past, but now have a future. Thousands have received help here over the years. Haidar says the uniform and shaved head helps keep the recovering addicts from running away. Despite a regimen of strict rules and demands, recovering addicts all call her mother. She says about 1 in 5 are able to stay off drugs. Is it going to be hard for you to stay clean the rest of your life?
I think the problem lies on with me. If I make contact with drug users again, I think I will get addicted again. It's that simple.
She's one of the few women in Afghanistan who drives and often refuses to wear a headscarf.
I believe human rights are women's rights, and I will fight for them.
Haidar also operates a halfway house for women, a safe haven for the abused and girls forced into the sex trade. Like this 16-year-old recently freed. She was sold to drug dealers by her parents to pay off a $1,000 heroin debt.
I see small girls that are being sold. I know girls who have been forced into a lifestyle that would shock you, whose stories of distress are so terrible you couldn't stand it.
It's something that she knows firsthand.
I was forced into a marriage with a mullah when I was just 12 years old. He was much older than me. I became a mother at 13, and by the age of 18, I had 3 children.
She summoned the courage to leave her husband and went into hiding. Haidar emerged a different woman. Afghanistan is negotiating a power-sharing structure with the Taliban in an effort to foster peace. But it's a deal Haidar wants no part of. This is how the Taliban can mete out justice, and the alleged crime, playing music.
A new government that includes the Taliban, that is frightening to me. I think all of our efforts will be wiped out, and women will once again be relegated to the house and the kitchen.
Innocence lost. Haidar doesn't want to see another generation suffer. So she's fighting to bring beauty and meaning to Afghanistan. Remember the men working at her restaurant? They are recovering addicts, providing opportunities where none existed.
I find happiness when someone returns to his or her normal life. That is really what makes me wholeheartedly happy.
And to her, it is much better to celebrate a step forward in a country that is all too familiar with setbacks. It may not look like the front lines, but consider this. The Afghan government says in the past 5 years, 45,000 of its security forces have been killed.
Crime exists all over the world, and criminals are everywhere.
And crime is on the upswing in the capital of Kabul. This armed robbery netted thieves some $40,000 worth of equipment and cash from this phone store. But bring up insurgents, and the commander's bravado comes pouring out.
But we are controlling the assaults, the terrorist attacks, and keeping other criminal acts under control.
But for all his posturing, the war on terror is not going well here. National police and soldiers are losing ground to the Taliban in much of Afghanistan. Despite miles of razor wire, concrete blast walls, and lots of guns, insurgents control more than 50% of the country.
Security is everywhere in the capital of Kabul, and the Afghan National Police are a constant presence throughout the country. One of their chief jobs here in Kabul is to man the so-called Ring of Steel to make sure that insurgents don't sneak into the heart of the city to unleash terror.
Danger and constant threats are never far away from Kabul citizens. Even within the walled confines of their modest home, it's hard for Abdul Fattah and his 55-year-old wife, Hanifa, to ever feel safe.
They are working on making the security better, but we feel panicked, and we can't walk around the city and feel secure. We fear suicide bombers and are afraid.
This is why. Insurgents are slipping through the porous Ring of Steel. In May of 2017, a truck carrying hundreds of kilos of explosives went off outside the German embassy in Kabul, the single most deadly insurgent attack in the country. More than 400 were injured, more than 150 killed, including their son, who was driving a taxi that day.
We all heard the explosion. My son didn't return. After that, his father called his phone, but no one answered. We checked all the hospitals and everywhere, but couldn't find him.
They later learned their son and his taxi were simply vaporized in the blast. For Hanifa, it has been 2 years of tears. Abdul is sick, and the only work he does involves tending to the garden he's trying to nurture out of Kabul's unforgiving soil. Their daughter-in-law abandoned the family, leaving the grandparents to raise 3 children, now without a father and mother. Muhammad Salah is being robbed of his innocence, his childhood, and getting an education and a decent job will be difficult.
My grandsons are asking for things that we can't afford, and I tell them, how can we get it without money? We lost your father.
2018 saw the largest number of civilian deaths in Afghanistan in nearly a decade, and this year is starting off in a similar fashion. Former President Hamid Karzai says it is time for peace.
You've been quoted as saying that the U.S.-Afghan partnership, relationship, has been a failure. Can you expand on that?
The U.S. came to Afghanistan to defeat extremism and to bring security. None of that happened. Rather, we lost thousands and thousands of lives.
And each life lost brings family destruction and heartbreak, a brutal 18-year epidemic.
When they make peace, they have to keep it and stop the war so people like us won't suffer the loss of their sons and are left in sorrow.
Left in sorrow and suddenly facing a bleak future, while the cycle of attempting to rein in violence continues. In a way, the restoration of Kabul's Darliman Palace represents not only a step toward healing, but perhaps one toward peace and a real sign of change. The working conditions here aren't ideal. The building has been a long-term wreck.
The result of war is devastation, which turned Darliman Palace, the best palace in the region, to a ruin.
Rising out of a dusty patch of land in western Kabul, this long-time eyesore is being rebuilt, even as the country's future remains uncertain. Among those working to restore the luster, long since vanquished, is 23-year-old engineer Faresh Tanouri.
When you look around this room, What do you see? What really goes through your mind as all this construction kind of comes together?
I think about the history. I think about what it used to be in the past and how it will be in the future.
Darlaman looked like this when we visited 5 years ago. The structure was originally built back in the 1920s. It was a constant target during fighting for a generation. But the shell of the building somehow survived. Educated at Smith College in the United States, Nouri didn't have to come back here, but she did.
If we don't build our country, who's gonna do that? And if we don't return to Afghanistan, we don't have the right to complain about the situation. We have to fix it.
Nouri represents what many hope will be the new Afghanistan, educated and a working woman. In a country where men and women having tea in public is still taboo, Nouri pushes for change. But at the same time, delicate on-again, off-again peace negotiations are making headlines, with the Taliban taking a lead role.
I definitely have my concerns because if they want to turn Afghanistan back to when they were in the Afghanistan, when they had the power, that's definitely a big step back for women.
She is right to be worried.
Former President Hamid Karzai is working to foster peace talks and to bring the Taliban to the table.
What could you tell her about her future?
We must also tell her that she should not be worried, that we will stand by her and that we will make sure that Afghanistan, that she envisages the Afghanistan that we will have.
For now, it's enough to keep Nouri going. She's proud the work is 100% Afghan. But Afghanistan remains dangerous, a war zone, and international bids for reconstruction went through the roof. Afghan officials say Russia wanted $71 million to do the job. Great Britain, more than $30 million. The United States wanted $100,000 a month for a project manager, the same job that pays Ahmad Jawed $400 a month.
I'm proud to work with Oman shoulder to shoulder in Darlaman Palace.
Despite all the problems, all the setbacks in Afghanistan, Nouri and others working on Darlaman keep a can-do attitude alive.
I think you're not alive if you don't have hope. If there's not hope, there's no moving forward, there's no feeling happy. So what is being alive without being happy and without moving forward?